Hello composers, Mike here. Do you want to learn a range of amazing velocity tricks in Logic Pro X for your MIDI parts in your music? Let's boost your MIDI powers right now. I will also give you a bonus tip in the end of this video. Velocity trick number 1, the velocity processor MIDI effect. Let me show you what this is about. So let's say you have recorded a part. I simply played in a simple piano part like this one. It's often the case that you get some notes way too loud in velocity, like these ones here, which simply sounds wrong. Instead of manually decreasing the velocity level of these high notes, you could use the velocity processor to compress them, almost like you compress an audio file or audio part. So you simply add the MIDI effect called velocity processor, and then you adjust it. So in this case, I want every note above, let's say, 80 in velocity level to be compressed on a ratio of 2:1. This means that if it's 127, as in this case, it will be compressed at the ratio of double down to the threshold of 80. So this will make these two notes be somewhere in between, basically. So listen to how it sounds now. Let's compress it slightly more, 3:1. That sounds way better. So you could basically say that you reduce the loudest notes, but you could use this in the opposite way by going below 1 on the ratio. Look at this curve here. It actually increases the velocity on notes above this threshold level, meaning you could use this, for example, on, let's say, this short string track here, where you can see my accents are a bit louder here, but if you don't think they are loud enough, you could apply the same velocity processor on this track and then simply use this to increase everything above 18 threshold, which would boost these accents in this case. Velocity trick number 2, velocity ramp. Meaning to increase the average velocity values over time, not setting a straight line like a roll, but let's say you have this part here, and you want to keep the relative velocity changes on these parts, but have a gradual increase of the overall velocity values. Well, if you go into the section here, into the part in the piano roll editor, use A to open up the automation to the note velocity, and then you use the pen tool. I have that as my command tool, so I hold down command, press somewhere here, and then if you hold your mouse button, you can make a line, and the steeper you make this line, up or down, you can make the gradual velocity increase be higher or lower. So in this case, I want to go like so. Look what happens to the velocity values from left to right. They shifted to be slightly increasing the average velocity of the parts here until the end, which basically is like a crescendo. So if I select everything and drag it down, I can make this really extreme by starting from low and then use the command, the pen tool here, make a line that's really drastic. And now you will really hear that it starts very low and then increases in volume. Compared to the first note, as you heard, very soft. So that's how you can make crescendos on basically any MIDI part. But let's say you want to make like a roll for your snares, drum parts, or staccato strings, or anything that you want to increase as a straight line in velocity values. Well, it's basically the same line technique, but instead of using the pen tool, you use the velocity tool. I have it as my third tool here, but you can access it in here. Now, if I use the velocity tool, as you can see, the same kind of line, but look what happens to the velocity values. They increase in a straight line instead, so you no longer have the accents and the relative velocity differences between them. But this could work for, as I said, snare rolls or drum rolls or stuff like that. Velocity trick number 4 is to compress the note velocity values here in the piano roll editor. As you can see, there is lots of dynamic shifting going on here, way too much to be honest. So if you simply select all the notes first, and then you take one of these notes here, you must open up the automation and set it on note velocity, so you get these. Take one of these, left click and drag it down. Look what happens. You not only drag it down, but you actually compress them. So you can compress them until you have the dynamic range you want. Then you release them and then select everything in again, and now use this to drag up the average velocity values. So now you get higher velocity values, but you do not get that major dynamic range you had before. Velocity trick number 5. Using the step editor to edit your velocity values. So instead of editing the notes right here in the piano roll with the slider or the velocity tool, clicking and dragging up or down, or using the automation lane and choosing the note velocity lane and then edit the notes right here, you can go into the step editor. And the advantage here is that you see each note divided into its own lane like this. So D4 here, A sharp 3 here, only the notes used. And then these bars represents the velocity value. So some people prefer to edit the velocities in here. Velocity trick number 6. Set all note velocities to the same value. So let's say I go into this taiko part here, and let's say I want to change these to be all of the same value, which is common for example, kick drums and so on. I could first select all of these simply by clicking this note here. All of those are selected. And then you hold down Option key or Alt key and Shift at the same time. Use the velocity tool, hover your mouse over here, and then when you click the velocity tool, hold down still Option and Shift and drag down, for example, and you can see now all these are the same velocity values, but of course I want them to be higher, so I can simply drag this to the max now. Now all of these are 127. Velocity trick number 7. Boost your accents. So let's say you have recorded a part like these short strings here. As long as you have got your main accents down, you can see that these are the accents slightly higher in velocity. Well, then you can boost them by expanding, not compressing the velocity range. And this is similar to compressing, but in the opposite direction. So simply bring up your automation lane, so you can see all the note velocities in here. Select everything. Then you can drag this velocity slider down, so we simply bring down all the values. They keep the respective dynamic range. Then, while all these notes are still selected, you simply left-click on one of these notes and drag them up like this. And you can see that I actually expand the dynamic range this way. Then you adjust it as for how much dynamic range you want, and then you can use this tool to drag it up or down in the scale. So let's use this, and you can see now that the velocity values of the accents are much higher. So listen to this. And this way you can get more pronounced accents. Now here's my bonus tip for you. The one velocity trick to rule them all. Well, at least it's my personal favorite. So let's say we have this string pattern here, and let's say you have written in the notes with your computer mouse and keyboard, which means you will end up with the same velocity value for each note, which of course sounds very stiff and boring. Now what is the solution to this? Well, it's up here in the Functions menu, MIDI Transform, Humanize. And here you will find a random generator that will randomize the velocity values for all the notes in this part, up or down in the range you choose here, which is 10 at the default setting. And also a bonus of using the Humanize feature is that you can see here that each note is perfectly quantized to the grid and also exactly the same note length, which also is not human and will feel very robotic and soulless. Well, here you also randomize the starting position of the notes in a value you choose here, which I usually leave at the default 10 ticks. And the length of the notes also randomizes in 10 ticks. So now if you select and operate, look what happens to these MIDI notes. Now you actually get some variation in the MIDI velocity, the quantization of the starting positions, and the length. And if we check this in the automation lane, you can actually see the notes are different now. And now you can start using the other features like expanding the velocity differences like so, or whatever you want, even adding the main accents if you wish, which I recommend, of course. So this is how you can humanize and add variation to notes that previously had all the same velocity value. Check out my complete video series on Logic Pro X tutorials and tips here on my channel. Learn and master Logic Pro X to boost your music composition and production workflow.